This isn't all we eat. Okay, I can put this away. I'm not getting undressed, but people ask me this question a lot. Do you only eat chocolate? No. Kale. This is my Rip Esselstyn engine juicer. I eat vegetables. I am not a candy bar vegan. My story in a nutshell is that I was raised by a mom who did not like to cook at all, so I grew up on canned food, canned peas and carrots. They smelled. If I did not eat them for dinner, they were there for breakfast. They weren't any better at breakfast. I loved Kraft macaroni and cheese when I had the real stuff because my mother-in-law really cooked. I didn't know what it was. I didn't like it. It wasn't orange. It didn't taste right to me, and so on. I had squash for the first time. But I just love the idea of eating with people and tasting these fresh foods, realizing that I never really liked eating animal food, and thinking back to, well, my mom gave me ice cream for breakfast. I know I told some of you that, and I know it's in all my books, and it's true. And Mom gave me permission to say that she was a lousy cook and that she gave me ice cream for breakfast. But clearly, I was a very, what do you call a kid who doesn't get in trouble? I was a very unnaughty little girl. My mother was very big. But I could not stomach milk. I couldn't swallow milk, so the pediatrician must have said, give that kid milk. Mom came up with this great idea, ice cream for breakfast. Maybe that's why I gravitated to sweets, I don't know. I actually like sweets, a little bit of a sweet. So I started cooking. I realized that I loved everything about food. I like shopping for it, I like chopping, I like cooking. And then I was married relatively young when my kids were early little kids, like not babies, but 12, 13. I went to New York restaurant school. And that's a conventional school. That is a meat, butter, let's call it traditional, because I think we're getting more conventional now. And I loved the experience. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with this. Maybe I thought I was going to teach. I got a job in a pastry shop. I was doing very well. The customers liked my food. The French chef, who I was told, get out of there before the French chef comes. He throws knives. He doesn't like. It wasn't cool to be a woman in the kitchen, is really what I'm saying, in those days. And I was happy with my work. I loved what I was doing, but I just felt worse and worse. My allergies were impossible. My stomach hurt all the time. I had kind of the shakes when I got home. So I left. Started doing rock and roll management. Now instead of getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm going out at midnight. That was kind of fun for a while. But I picked up a book one day in California called the book was called Food and Healing by Anne-Marie Colvin, Dr. Anne-Marie Colvin. She wrote a book called Food and Healing. I read the book. I said, it's the food. What you eat can make a difference in how you feel. It made sense to me. So I thought, it must be the milk. Without really being fully conscious, understanding what I was doing, I gave up milk, I gave up butter, I gave up eggs, I gave up animal food, and honestly, within days, that was it. My allergies were gone. I don't think about my weight very much, except on this cruise I'm thinking about it a little bit. And my energy was steady. It was as if I was a kid again. And that never changed. I just loved it. So, like Miyoko and many of us, I changed my diet originally for health reasons. But you learn. And Dr. Colvin said, you change your diet, your life is going to change, your friends are going to change, everything is going to change. And that really came to be. Has anyone had that experience? So, yeah, and then I learned about the animals. And then I had the privilege of being asked to teach at conferences. So from Howard, this hamburger fiasco, that when they feeding cows to cows, not only are they making them cannibals, but that's mad cow disease, right? Yeah. So for every reason, I couldn't unlearn what I learned. Well, what I wasn't going to do was make desserts, because for a very very short period of time when I changed my diet, and so I became a vegan about 25 years ago. We were kind of mixing the soy milk powder and everything, most of what was available, which wasn't very much. Nothing tasted good. So I didn't want to do desserts. I thought sugar was evil. That's what I thought. And then my 14-year-old son said, "You're not putting a candle in a baked sweet potato and telling me that's no birthday cake." And he said that, and I thought, you know, the kid's got a point. He's got a point. So I went out into the marketplace to see what was available, cake-wise, cookie-wise, and really there was nothing that tasted good to me, unless you like dry gummy. Dry and gummy kind of went together. And then someone gave me, "Fran, try this chocolate cake." It was brown. It was carob. There's nothing wrong with carob necessarily, but it sure isn't chocolate. So I, like Miyoko again, I went into the test kitchen and I started working. And I thought, if I can make something that's as good as a good conventional dessert, or better than, we'll see what happens. And I say that because when people say vegan and dessert, that's an oxymoron. Well, does anybody remember eating a dessert that was non-vegan before you became vegan that wasn't good? I sure do. There's a lot of food that just doesn't taste good. So I tested and I'm not an especially patient person. The desserts doing the dessert work kind of brings me down, where I have to pay attention and so on. It's really zen for me. And then I got this chocolate cake, and everybody started, my tasters, my friends were happy to be tasters, not really in the beginning, but after a while. And they said, "This is a chocolate cake to live for." And that cake has been in all of my books. I wrote a self-published book in the year 2000, a book in the year 2006, and vegan chocolate 2 years ago. And that was it. That is the cake. That was Rick Esselstyn's wedding cake. And so I have that cake as, made with wheat flour. That cake is done gluten-free. And the cake is done also for people who are SOS. So do you know what SOS is? Salt, oil, sugar, free. Whatever works for you. I think as vegans, we might want to stop fighting about what's the best vegan diet. I think that we need to be compassionate to ourselves too, about ourselves, which means
chocolate.
Okay, means chocolate. But you can't eat this and you can't eat that. I don't want to be a candy bar vegan. I want to take care of myself so I can live to be 100 maybe. Annoy people for a really long time. I just feel so good, and there's so much to see. I haven't traveled as much as Howard, but I'm kind of getting there. There is vegan all over the world. I mean, in Italy this summer, they were like, "Vegan? Sure, we can do vegan. We have vegan restaurants," and so on. So I want to, I'm going to ask you to ask me anything. I might not answer everything, but I'm going to ask you to I'll answer some questions. But I want to talk to you about what I think is important about the chocolates. And I do desserts that aren't chocolate. I do. I believe in not being a candy bar vegan, so I'm holding up chocolate bars. But what I mean is today we can get everything, right? We can get virtually everything. I think eating plant-based, eating real foods. And Miyoko was saying she doesn't want to use soy isolate protein. If you do, you do, that's okay. But I don't live on chocolate and jelly beans and so on. Yes, chocolate is a bean, but I need to eat kidney beans and black beans and garbanzo beans and tempeh and so on too. When I look for chocolate, or people say to me, "Well, how do you make a cake if you're vegan? What do you use for chocolate?" I say, "Chocolate." "What do you use for flour?" "Flour." And really, you have to get to know, you need to read labels, because today, since vegan has gone from being you're a vegan to really, it's a hot marketing term. So a lot of the big companies are buying the small companies, and a lot of the small batch chocolatiers that are vegan and fair trade and ethical are being bought up by the big guys. So for example, Green and Black was, as far as I know, the first vegan fair trade chocolate company, and they were in England. They were taken over by, it was a takeover by Cadbury, and then a hostile takeover by Kraft Food, I think, or somebody even, whoever owns Kraft Food, one of the really top guys, and all of a sudden, all over. I mean, there is, Green and Black is now not there. Still, the label is still Green and Black, but they are owned by, you know, some big, one of the big food companies. And so I flipped over the label one day. I liked Green and Black, and I was like, oh, look at that. There's organic milk powder on the back of this bar. Not good. For vegans, it's annoying for us. It's disappointing for people who are allergic. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. So if you have a favorite chocolate or chocolatier, every single time you buy the product, you really need to look now. The FDA published a report recently that said 26% of the chocolate bars in the marketplace that were marked vegan bars contained dairy. So what's that about? Has anybody seen that study? All right. Subscribe to my blog, you'll know things. Well, because we tend to be a litigious society, you'll see, you know, chocolate marked, made on shared equipment, may contain dairy or nuts or soy. It's a shared equipment thing. However, the first run of chocolates that come off of these machines can contain significant amounts of dairy. That's something you want to check into. There are companies that have dedicated equipment. So I used to say to people, if you're not buying a chocolate that's a milk chocolate and it's a dark chocolate, then you're good. But that isn't really the case anymore. There are companies that have, you know, real ethics. I bought this yesterday. Where were we yesterday? In Sitka? In Sitka. So this is a beautiful 72% Ecuadorian chocolate with cacao nibs, sea salt, it says vegan, and soy lecithin free. That is a pure chocolate bar. The reason that it was in Sitka is that this company that comes, this is made in, Vermont. It says small batch in Vermont or someplace in New England, wanted to use the sea salt from the sea salt company in Sitka. I don't know if this is an ethical chocolate bar, but it may be. I know that Theo Chocolate in Seattle was the first bean-to-bar chocolate in the United States, and they do not do only vegan chocolates, but they do quite a lot of vegan chocolates. They're very open to vegan, and this says non-GMO, USDA, organic, and fair for life. Is there anybody who, I'm sure that a lot of you know what I'm talking about when I talk about ethical or fair traded chocolates. You want to check a website called the foodempowermentproject.com. I'm bumpering around here because it gets me so upset, but there is today, in 2015, there is still slavery, particularly child slavery, involved in the production of chocolate. So at best, harvesting chocolate beans is terrible hard work. You're in the jungle, it's hot, there's machetes involved, and these kids are really pulled and abused, and they are actual slaves. So Hershey says by the year 2020, they are going to abolish child slavery. That's a kind of a long time. 2020. So you don't, we vote with our forks. I say vote with our forks. The companies, they want our dollars. We make a protest. Halloween is coming. Don't buy Hershey's. Let them know. Let them know. It's just, it's a horrifying situation. So I look for chocolates that are high percentage. The higher the percentage of a bar says 70%, 72%, 68, 85, whatever. The higher the percentage, that's the cacao mass. That's the chocolate, less sugar. So you're getting really more bang for your buck there in terms of chocolate flavor. The different percentages taste differently. I think I said this at my demo, so you want to do a little homework, buy a couple of 70% bars, find out the one that tastes the best to you. And then I'm really encouraging everybody to find out about the ethics of chocolate. Some companies can't afford the certification, but they go even further. Some of the bars are going to tell you, the single origin bars, what farm the bean came from, who was the farmer even, and these things really, really matter. There are a lot of accidentally, you know, when I say accidentally, chocolate manufacturers, they're not necessarily saying vegan, although you're going to see more of the V sign, because again, vegans like to eat, and the manufacturers and the companies know this, and they're looking for our dollars too. But these chocolates are really fine, and I have had, you know, when I left the traditional, the conventional, whatever it is, pastry world, and I had been working as a chef, and I belonged to some chef organizations, and then I was like shunned, you know, it was like, who are you? How can you possibly be doing food if you're doing vegan food? You have to be able to taste things. So I told some of you at dinner that I brought one of the recipes in my chocolate book is, you know, what do? We make, well, I make food that I like. So I grew up with a cake from Brooklyn, and Ebinger's Bakery, a very special bakery that made a blackout cake. So it's chocolate cake with chocolate pudding in the middle of 2 layers, around the sides and on the top. So how hard is that? You don't need a pastry bag, you just whop up some chocolate pudding and you throw crumbs on the cake. And I brought this to a chef group, very serious chef group, you know, with tokes and things, and they said, see, we knew you wouldn't stay vegan. They just couldn't believe it. Well, I suggest to you that you need to use good ingredients, you need to use quality ingredients. I encourage you to use ethical ingredients. I encourage, beg you to measure carefully. Make sure that your oven is at temperature. I have all of those Fran's rules, and I do use my finger. You know, your time is valuable. You want things to taste good. You don't want someone to say, see, I told you vegan cakes can't taste good because you used carob instead of chocolate, or you didn't measure, or whatever. It's actually a piece of cake. Vegan desserts, vegan cakes are easier to make than conventional cakes. So they just are. You have a bowl with your dry ingredients. You have a bowl with your liquid ingredients. You put them together. Not until your cake pan is greased and prepared and the oven is at temperature and the rack is in the right place, and so on and so on and so on. And then you bake it, and that's it. And you do things in advance. So in my book, I have a whole chapter on, you know, I don't always read the front of a book. I mean, like, I'll tell you what to do, but I don't always do it. When my grandma used to say, do as I, what is it? Do as I say, not as I do, or something like that. So I have a whole introductory chapter telling you why I whisk dry ingredients to aerate them, and then I fill the cups a certain way, or measure, and then whisk, you know, my way of doing it, and it'll work out. When I was working at Angelica Kitchen in New York, and I had to make, you know, 12, 14 cakes at one time, you don't need fancy equipment. I had bigger whisks and bigger bowls. I got bigger biceps. It was good for everyone. It's just you need to pay attention. If the recipe says 70 to 72% chocolate and you decide to use 55% chocolate, don't write to me and say expect sympathy when you tell me that your ganache didn't set, because it's not going to. But I have also troubleshooting guide in the beginning of each chapter saying, well, I hope you didn't do this, but if you did, this is how you can fix it. And also what to do ahead. I go through all of this. I have people coming from, there is pretty much not a country that I can think of that someone hasn't shown up at this point at my vegan baking boot camp that I teach a couple times a year in New York. Not everybody's vegan, but people want for many reasons now. And so, you know, it's like, every so often, I come back from Summerfest. Summerfest is a 5-day event where you get lots of speakers. We're on land. It's kind of like this. Wherever vegans are, right? It's a happy place. So I forgot what I was saying. What do you think? Where was I going with that? I have no idea.
You're talking about your boot camp.
Boot camp. I don't know how Summerfest got in there.
People from every country.
Yeah, there are people, it'll come back to me. It's sort of like, you know, what is it that I haven't made yet?
You told troubleshooting in the front?
Troubleshooting. No, it wasn't that either. I don't know. And yes, I have 4 grandchildren. So, yeah, I don't know. Does anybody have any questions? Right? Come on, shoot me a question right now, and then I'll remember. Yes?
Are you thinking about putting out chocolates like caramel, sea salt caramel, dark chocolate?
You mean like manufacturing them? Yeah, I like the idea of that. I'd like to have a business, and then I kind of hit myself in the head and say, what are you, crazy? Yeah, I think about it sometimes, but there are wonderful chocolatiers now doing vegan caramels, and anybody here familiar with L'Augusta in New Paltz?
Yeah.
L'Augusta's Luscious. There are wonderful little chocolatiers all over. Anybody else have a question? Yes, I can't see you, so.
Do you have a recommendation for the brand or kind of the most affordable chocolate that you would use in the kitchen, like not to eat out of the wrapper, but
The most affordable chocolate, is that the question?
Yeah.
If you go to my website, no, that's not my name, FranCostigan.com. I'm looking at the water and it's going like this, and I think I'm feeling drunk. FranCostigan.com, and I have a list of chocolates that you can buy kind of at wholesale or grab me. You know, you can all grab me. I'm not jumping ship. I'm going to be here, and I can tell you some chocolatiers. But you can buy chocolates in bulk that are reasonably priced. But you really can't buy chocolate that's cheap and have it be good. So, for example, you know, these are premium quality chocolates. You don't need a lot to have whatever you're making. I mean, you need whatever the measured amount is, but you're going to get a really beautiful chocolate taste. There's a pastry chef out of New York. His name is Ron Ben Israel. He's been on food television. He had his own show. His wedding cakes are the most expensive wedding cakes in the world. He makes them for royalty and so on. And he said, you know, Fran, you were right about taking the dairy out of the chocolate. And I can say this, it was like, first it was a whispered conversation, like, okay, Ron, I won't tell you anybody that you're saying that vegan chocolate is good. But he blurbed the back of my book, and he says that without the added butter and the heavy cream and all that kind of stuff, and really the junk that people put into chocolate desserts, it dulls the flavor of the chocolate. Chocolate chips are great for chocolate chip cookies. They're not good for making a ganache. You're gonna get a grainier ganache. They're made not to melt. So you kind of, you know, you learn your chocolate a little bit, but this is not rocket science. It really isn't. Anybody can do this. I've had people look at my book. It's a beautiful book. I had a vegan stylist and photographer. I mean, I really got lucky. That's a very mainstream publisher, and they said, you know, it's really time that we had a gorgeous vegan chocolate book. There are a lot of chocolate books out there. None of them are vegan. I want to recommend to you, again, I say this over and over again, that when you serve your dessert, that you don't say, I did in the beginning, because I was so excited in the beginning, you're not going to believe what's not in here. There's no eggs, there's no butter, what happened, you know, and then people just shut down. They shut down. And it's pretty good for what it is. So don't do that. I mean, if you're with a bunch of vegans, it's okay. But basically, let the cake speak for itself, and it will. Our food is delicious. We can have anything. Anybody wondering about eggs? All right.
I bought your book. I can't wait to read it. However, I want to know now, can I apply some of the crusts or the pastries to savories?
Some of the pastries to savories?
Yeah, like a fusion crust or
Yes, the pie crusts in the book, certainly you can do a savory dessert. My desserts are sweet, you know, they're dessert, so they're sweet enough, but they're not overly sweet. When I first changed, you know, I was in that holier than thou kind of place where I wasn't really sure that I wanted to do sweets, so I took I knew that I could reduce the amount of sugar that was in most old-fashioned desserts. They were all too sweet, and if something is too sweet, you don't taste the other flavors. But I pulled out all of the sugar out of brownies when I was working once, and my boss said, Costigan, you're making brownies, not brown bread. And he had a point. He had a point. Just as long as you know the principles, you can do that. So sure, you can do some savory, but what I do is I think about texture. I want a cake that's got a beautiful crumb, and then I want a layer of ganache, maybe that's going to give it a little crunch, and also waterproof the layer, then some nice cream, and so on. And all of the recipes are building blocks. In boot camp, they call me the diva of dairy-free. I get a little strict about things, and I have eyes behind my head, but I want people to go home. I mean, they're spending 5 days and some money. I want them to go home and be able to make things. And so you follow the recipe carefully. If there's a mistake in the recipe, and sometimes there is, if you see 12 tablespoons of vanilla extract in one cake, someone forgot the / and it happens. So, you want to read your recipes all the way through. You want to use the correct ingredients. You want to use the right size pan. You want to cool the cakes and all that kind of stuff, and you just want to enjoy it and have. We all have birthdays. We all have weddings. There is going to be, someone called me up and said, I don't believe in what you're doing, but my son's bringing a vegan home for Thanksgiving. And there is not a person on this planet at this point who hasn't had that experience, as far as I know. So I'm giving people the opportunity to be able to make things. And, I remember what I couldn't remember before. Speaking of Thanksgiving, it's that periodically I would come back from a place like Summerfest or another conference and think, I'm not doing it enough. I'm making cupcakes. That's how important is a cupcake. But I have really seen over time that if people see that they're not going to be deprived, that they can have a treat, then they will listen. Oh, you're a vegan and you have a cupcake? Really? Okay, then they can listen. And the food brings people in. And I really haven't met, I'll see people who say, oh, I don't eat sweets. And especially in the beginning, after I changed my diet, when I was a little bit food police-y, like, I don't eat sweets. And the macrobiotics in the back of the room, in the back of my classroom, they were drinking maple syrup out of the jug. Because they really were. Because our bodies are going to make balance, and we want things, and we fight with stuff. So what I do is I make something, and I am really proud of what I do. They really taste good. And I make I'll serve a cake, a slice of cake that's smaller, and I'll fill out the plate with a lot of fruit, put a little swirl of chocolate on the plate, like a drop, but we eat with our eyes, and then I say to myself, there, I just gave them dessert with benefits, because it's really a lot of fruit and so on. But, people say, well, the fact is, I do have a cookie every day. I do have probably a truffle every day. I might have a small cupcake every day. Not all the same day, though. Not all the same day. What I do is I eat green. We have, when I changed my diet, I never felt deprived, not from day one, because I was already interested in cooking, and I had this wow, look at all these foods that I didn't know about, that I never had as a kid, because I didn't have a mom who liked to cook. So for me, it's really been a wonderful, wonderful thing, and I really want to encourage everyone. You can get a lot of people to listen, to understand more about why not eating animals and killing animals and factory farming, why that's bad, and the environment, and you put out a plate of treats for them, or you have them to your house and they can have something as well. You have any questions? Anybody? Yeah?
I could probably ask you later, but with your recipes that are that don't have wheat, can I use all-purpose gluten-free flour?
Yeah, that's a good question. Emma asked about gluten-free, so I didn't used to say, okay, half a cup of all-purpose flour, half a cup of whole wheat pastry flour, just take it out and put in a gluten-free flour mix, and there are a lot of recipes that say that, and to me they don't pass my taste test. But there is yes, there are some beautiful gluten-free flour mixes on the market now. Bob's Red Mill has a new one that's called 1 for 1, cup for cup, something like that. All gluten-free, all-purpose baking flour that is incredible. It's really incredible. And I tell you in the book, you look at the gluten-free flour mix, and if it doesn't have guar gum or xanthan gum in it, you have to add this much. If it does, then don't. So yes, you can. I have recipes for people who, you know, I have this little hashtag. I said, I eat wheat, I eat sugar, I use a little oil. But I respect people who are eating without gluten. And I also, you know, I did cake for Dr. McDougall at he used to have what he called celebrity chef weekends, and I had to come up with a cake with no oil, and you already know about rib. So it's not my preferred way, but it works. I worked hard until it worked. So yes, that's a long answer to yes.
Okay.
Anybody else? Yeah?
Do you have a recommendation for baking pans when you use
Baking pans.
branded?
I can't hear.
Baking pans.
Baking pan?
Yeah.
A nice, you know, no, not one. I tend not to use Teflon pans. Use the right size pan. That's my #1 recommendation because that really makes a difference. A nice heavy pan, you know, so that the heat will transfer correctly. And it's very important to prepare your pans correctly. I oil my pans and use a piece of parchment paper unless the particular recipe says otherwise. I don't grease and flour because my desserts just tend to be, I don't like the outside of the cakes when that happens, okay? Trying to think. Anybody else? Yeah?
I use silicone baking.
You do?
Yeah.
And it works?
Yeah.
Well, if it isn't broken, keep using it. I haven't, yeah?
Easy to clean up.
They are easy to clean up. They are easy to clean up. A lot of my cakes, the batter tends to, so when I say, I mean, I don't only do cakes, but the batter-based, my batter-based desserts, the batter tends to be thinner than you might be used to, and I don't believe that the silicone gives you the best result. It hasn't given me the best result. So if you get a regular baking pan and you oil it, and you put a piece of parchment paper in the bottom, it will clean up very easily, okay? Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah?
What is your, if you have just straight chocolate bar, you're like sitting down, just eat chocolate, not bake with it, do you have a preferred brand? What's your one that?
That's a really hard question. That's a hard question. It depends. There, you know, I tend to like a darker tasting chocolate, one that's almost like tasting very tannic wine, but that's me. But I will tell you that it has become a full-time job to taste all the vegan chocolates, all the premium vegan chocolates that are available. So it changes.
Can you name, like right now, what your favorite is?
I don't have a favorite.
Okay.
And I have, no, but what I will tell you is I have favorites within different categories. I haven't really liked chocolates that are labeled raw, but there are some now, Picari, that I think is very good. I like some of Theo's chocolate. I like, who knows, who's from Brooklyn? Anybody here? There's a chocolatier in Brooklyn, a new chocolatier in Brooklyn that's doing wonderful chocolates. I'll remember and I will find you, or I'll let everybody know. I was last year, I'm getting used to being the token vegan, except when I'm on a vegan event. So I got invited last year. Seattle has what they call the Northwest Chocolate Show. It's 2 days of chocolate at the convention center. And so it's all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and Friday night they give out awards. So the top chocolate award went to a French man making vegan chocolate in Vietnam. And these are single origin, fair trade chocolates. I mean, just magnificent. People were starting to sample the chocolates at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I can't do that, really. So, you know, it's sort of like when I got invited to a mezcal tasting event once, and I said, just tell me what are the best two you think, because that's pretty much what I can handle. But there are just chocolates. There's chocolates grown in Hawaii now. There's chocolate in Vietnam. There's chocolate everywhere. The chocolatier I met from Hawaii has a PhD in ethnobotany. He's a pretty overqualified chocolatier, I guess. But I took a bean to bar class with him and really understood, going back to, do you want to have a chocolate caramel company? It takes so much work to make chocolate. So when people say, well, that premium bar costs $5.99 or $6.99, that's a lot of money for chocolate. If you get a bottle of wine for $6.99, most people think that's not very much money. That and my expectations for that wine. People are really working hard. And at this Northwest Chocolate Fest, and I was the only vegan there, they decided to experiment and see if, you know, a vegan could do a demo, and it worked out just fine. There were women from Ecuador, I think, who said that chocolate is the revolution for them. That their relatives, that their country has been decimated by loggers and so on, and they are replanting the cacao trees, and people who were working in the field who had never ever been allowed to taste a piece of the chocolate they made because they were in essence slaves or indentured servants, now were, and that this was a cash crop for them, and that they were going to take back their country and make it better, that schools were being built and so on. So, you know, it was just everywhere I looked, there was new chocolates, new chocolatiers making really beautiful, beautiful chocolate. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's great. I got to taste, you know, have you ever seen, there's chocolate's a big bean that looks like a football, and then it gets whacked in half, and there's some white stuff that gets fermented off, and we're not allowed, for some reason it can't come into this country that way, but at the Chocolate Fest, some guy said, psst, someone over here. I said, I really want to taste it, and I tasted it, and it was great. And you know, I learned the process. So a lot of us know that the beans are inside of the big pod, and the pods are all different colors and so on. I mean, it's really beautiful. But the first step is that the beans are laid out and are fermented. And so there really is no such thing as raw chocolate, strictly speaking. There's no such thing, because the temperature during the fermentation goes to around 120, 125, and I know some of you know more about raw than I do, and that's over what is legally allowed to be raw. So what it is it's unroasted chocolate, and you know, it's a preference. I like my chocolate roasted. I like my coffee strong. You might not, that's all. Anybody else? Because I'm just hearing myself talk, yeah.
With the different states that have now legalized marijuana, and now like edibles are becoming more prevalent, do you have any experience using different forms of pot to cook with?
Let's turn off the mic. Actually, I do not at this point, but I will tell you that I read food trends. I get, you know, the reports in my inbox. That is the #1 big cash cow right now, is everyone is looking to do edibles. So maybe I'll have caramel. It's big. There's big money to be made there. I haven't. I'm a wimp. I would be like over. You know, when I test a recipe, I can really only take little teeny tests at a time, because I am sensitive to sweets. I really am. And so I had testers, you know, I mean, what Miyoko's talking about, it's kind of hard work. It's tedious, to say the least, especially when you're someone like me who's like, I have to get in the zone to really pay attention. And when I'm testing something and it's good, but it's not where I want it, it's good. And then I have to think, well, I can change this and that. Maybe it needs to be bright, and that would be citrus or this. But you can really only change one thing at a time. And it's kind of hard for me. I've had to learn also that there are times that you just have to get rid of something. It's like, this is not going to work. This is terrible. And put it away. But there's a lot of ways. If you're making something and you've spent your time and if you've used quality ingredients, and I don't like waste. I don't like waste. Food is precious. I think we are so lucky that we have, you know, so much food, and then it's heartbreaking that so many people on this earth have nothing. I don't want to waste anything. So if I've made a cake it's good, but it's not good enough. What I do is I'll crumble up the crumbs, put it on a sheet pan, always lined with parchment, easier to clean up. Put it in my oven, dry it out a little bit, and I have cake crumbs. So now if I have a little bit of ice cream, you put some crumbs on there, you have a little bit of ganache left over, and it really looks like something. Or I'll make a crumb crust, you know, so there's all kinds of things you can do if you've made a cake and it does look good coming out of the oven and it smells good, and you cut off a little bit of the top to look at the crumb and it tastes good, and then you turn around and you come back and the center collapsed, or as happened this winter when I did a bûche de Noël and I gave it to someone to take to the table and it fell. We made a trifle. I said, 10-second rule, whatever, okay, put it in a bowl if your cake breaks. There's a lot that you can do to repurpose. All of my cakes, cookies, virtually everything, you bake them, you cool them, put them in your freezer. You've got cake when you need it. You've got your creams when you need it. I found out about the vanilla cream that you tasted on the fruit the other day. I started putting some leftover in silicone ice cube trays, popping them out when I needed it. Found out that they defrost. It comes back to cream really well. And one day I was kind of unconscious, which I try not to do when I'm around sweets, and I started gnawing on it, and I was like, oh my God, that is really good ice cream. So, you know, you find stuff out. My recipes went out to testers all over the world, all over the United States, all over the world. Some, I had to say, that is your oven. Those are the knobs. Get a thermometer for your oven, because you can have a really good expensive oven. You put it on 350 and the oven goes to 450 or 250 and you don't know it and you have a fail. So, you know, those are the kind of things. So things are really well tested, but don't give up. Just don't give up. Sometimes you get a happy accident, but you don't really want to go there, just in case. Nobody's going to ask me about eggs. You are a very sophisticated group. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you about eggs anyway, because I can't stand it. Well, people say all the time, people say to me, you know, it's like, okay, where do you get your protein? You have grandchildren? How old are you? I'm not telling you. How much, you know, things like that. Eggs, people are very surprised when our cakes rise. They go, really? Look at that. Well, before we were really talking about vegan, during wartime, people didn't have eggs. And they had cake. So I started, you know, when I became vegan, I kept the principles that I learned in pastry school. I think if you really want to do fine desserts or good cuisine, and then we're doing everybody a favor because we're putting out good food, you want to look at traditional technique. You know, foundational technique is really important. I think my pie crust tastes good because I'm following the pie crust rules, which some of you know. You know, the dough rests and the ingredients are cold and this and that and the other thing. So you've got to do those things. So I'm looking at these recipes and I'm like, I don't think that I knew about egg replacer 25 years ago. I don't know. There probably energy egg replacer was out there, but it wasn't in my consciousness. So I'm looking at these recipes that don't have eggs, that were wartime recipes, baking powder, baking soda, and vinegar. And you see those recipes online and they work. And so I kind of don't have a one size fits all. It depends on the cake, but essentially baking powder, baking soda, and vinegar make a cake rise. I use some chia gel now to make a kind of a chewy macaroon, not a macaron, that's with aquafaba. But, you know, it's just kind of interesting that these things happen. Eggs only leaven when you separate the yolk and the white, and you whip the white, speaking of angel food cake, and then the white, the egg white that's whipped, is the leavener. But other than that, eggs are, what are they? They're liquid. That's no problem. They bind, that's no problem. Flavor, we have flavoring agents. So, you know, I just went, okay, this much liquid in an egg, this much, and there was just no problem there. I think eggs are yucky. Eggs are yucky and overrated. Any other questions? Yeah?
So for replacement eggs, my favorite is using ground flaxseed and adding water and getting kind of a gel from that. Sometimes using too much of that or some of the other, you know, energy egg replacer, I think gives a little bit of an off taste. Are there any egg replacers that you have found things to kind of counteract any off taste, or do you just move on to the next egg replacer option?
I'm glad that you said that about the off taste, because I just want to make this blanket statement that if you're doing something and it works, then don't change it, you know. But I taste flax I taste flax gel. So I don't use it, and I learned how to do what I do with that energy. I taste it, and I learned to do what I did with that energy egg replacer. So my recipes have just like egg replacer in the recipes, which is no egg replacer. It's just the flour, and you know, baking powder and baking soda were invented. The colonists, before there was baking powder and baking soda, their cakes were really flat and dense. And they're called chemical leaveners. So I use Whole Foods, I don't like to say chemical, but that's what they are. So just, maybe you're using too much, and that's why you're tasting it. If you use too much egg replacer, things get crumbly. You're really experienced with the energy, right?
Yeah, well actually if I use too little, then
They get crumbly?
It gets kind of crumbly.
Yeah.
With me, like if I use too much, I don't taste it, but I've never added like way too
Right.
much.
I mean, I started looking at what is an egg replacer, and it's kind of what I got in there. You know, it's starches and things like that, and the vinegar reacts with everything, and it gives a nice crumb. My recipes will say, if you're familiar with my recipes or you look at my book, organic all-purpose flour, organic whole wheat pastry flour. Whole wheat pastry flour isn't the same thing as whole wheat flour, which is bread flour. It's good for pizza, it's good for bread, it's too tough for cakes. So I like that combination because I'm using a liquid fat. I say organic sugar because I want to use organics and I want to use fair trade. And also, organic sugar and fair trade sugar is always vegan. White sugar, you know, commercial white sugar is not vegan. It's been filtered through bone char. Vegans like to use beet sugar for a really long time because that is not filtered through bone char. Never was. However, beets are practically, they're a GMO. They're GMO, so we don't necessarily, I won't want to use that. So the closest to white sugar is organic sugar. But I tell people, yeah, I'm using organics and I'm using fair trade. You don't have to. Your cakes are going to turn out fine as long as you're baking powder. I use aluminum-free baking powder. You know, I'm worried about my brain. I don't want to ingest aluminum. They say that contributes to Alzheimer's and forgetting things, and I have enough problems, so I don't want to use that, but I make sure, so you don't have to. Other people don't have to, but make sure your baking powder is fresh, because that will make a difference. I never used Earth Balance, for example. I think it's great that it's there, and I've tasted Miyoko's butter, because I have had the privilege to stay with her. If you ever want to, if you get lucky enough to stay at her home, you get fed very, very, very well. She's got butter in the fridge and cream cheese in the fridge and cheese and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't use Earth Balance because when I went from, you know, the butter, sugar, egg kitchen to the vegan kitchen, I was thinking that I wanted to use quality ingredients. I didn't use margarine then, I didn't want to use it now. So I was looking for a liquid fat. In my first book, I used canola oil. If canola isn't organic, it's very highly sprayed and it's genetically modified. So I went looking for another liquid fat. I use a mild tasting extra virgin olive oil. I know what an olive is, I know how it gets pressed, and it works great. It works great. So it's just like, it's real, you know, it's just really common sense. What I know that I did say at my demo, don't mix up the kind of cocoa powder. You want to have natural and you want to have Dutch process, that's fine, but follow what the recipe says. Pop quiz, anybody remember? Which is the leavener that you use for, if you see baking soda, do you know which cocoa powder it is? Natural. You get a bigger piece of pudding tonight. Okay. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, I will be around. Thank you for listening.